The father of stress research is a man by the name of Hans Selye, endocrinologist, MD, but he was also a researcher. Now, there's plenty of people who did this work before him and after him, Walter Cannon and Charles Sajou and Harrower. There are a lot of people that did this work, and a lot of that is explained, that history is explained in my predecessor's book, Chronic Fatigue Unmasked 2000, if you're curious about that. Hans Selye studied rats, and he wasn't actually very good with handling his rats. And what he ended up learning, he was actually studying something else, but what he learned was by mishandling his rats, he stressed them out. And what he noticed as he stressed his rats was that they all kind of got sick and developed symptoms in the same fashion, which led him down this path to now study these rats and figure out, okay, well, let me stress these rats in different ways. Toxins and exercise challenges and infections and injuries and social stresses and things like that. How you socially stress a rat, I'm not really sure, but he ended up figuring that out. And what he found was that no matter how he stressed these rats, they all kind of got sick in the same way. Basically, they developed these symptoms of adrenal fatigue, of stress response system dysfunction. They had immune system problems, and they were neurotic and depressed, and they wouldn't procreate, and all these kind of interesting things. Now, what he did then was he kind of coined this phrase, the General Adaptation System. The idea being that our body has to return to homeostasis after being perturbed out of balance, right? So our body has to adapt to that situation and return. And we use this General Adaptation System to return back to homeostasis. What he then kind of went forward with was calling this a General Adaptation Syndrome, in that when we overwork that system, that's what starts to get broken. It's not as easy to return back to homeostasis. As he further described the syndrome that his rats and people would develop, he coined 3 phases within this condition: the alarm phase, the resistance phase, and then the exhaustion phase, right? So in the beginning, we're hypervigilant. And when I do cortisol testing on patients, the beginning phases of this, actually our hormones are all high, right? All the stress hormones are high. We're in this alarm phase, we're hypervigilant, and we get a certain set of symptoms, more wired in anxiety and can't sleep and nervousness, palpitations, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's kind of alarm phase. At some point, there's this resistance phase, is what he talked about it. At some point, you can't sustain that. Like how long can a zebra run from a lion in the wild, right? At some point, you're going to kind of run out of that hormone. And as you run out of that hormone, the stage kind of changes. The cortisol comes down. The DHEA starts getting exhausted, especially. Most people will lose DHEA before they'll lose cortisol. I'll talk more about that. The symptoms can kind of change, right? We get a little more of the fatigue, more of the depressive things. A lot of patients in this phase are both wired and tired, which is definitely a challenge. As that progresses over time, people can then enter the exhaustion phase, where now their system is really collapsing. Those hormones, right? Cortisol is going down. So now cortisol can't do what it's designed to do. And one of the big things it's designed to do is provide us with energy. Right? So cortisol keeps going down, DHEA keeps going down, and then we're in this exhaustion phase. I talk in terms of functional capacity in my practice, and people in the earlier phases, they're pretty high functionally, right? Maybe 70, 75, 80%. They've got a bunch of symptoms, like those symptoms I talked about with fight or flight, right? But they can still function. As people move through the resistance phase, they start to drop their functionality. They drop down to 60, 50. This would be people more like, 40 to 60, 70% functional. At some point then, if you keep going through the exhaustion phase, you end up 10, 20, 30% functionality. And on my scale, like 50%, you could barely survive a full-time job. You start going back even lower. I mean, people have problems even with like just activities of daily living and, cooking, cleaning, getting showers and things like that. It can be pretty debilitating. So how long this takes to move through these phases really varies quite incredibly. I mean, I've seen people within 6 to 12 months go from alarm phase to exhaustion phase. I've also seen people take decades, literally decades, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, where they've been able to sustain this early stage, even resistant stage, for decades before they finally exhaust that system. I think it depends on how big that bucket is, right? I mean, how Genetically, we have that certain size bucket. Some people fill it up real fast. Other people, it's huge. You can still fill it up, right? But it just takes, inordinate amounts of stress or just that chronic stress over time to finally break down that system. Doesn't matter what stage or phase you're in with this condition, it absolutely can be fixed. Absolutely. Doesn't matter how long you've been dealing with this condition, right? Because people will tell me, but doc, now that I understand what I'm dealing with, I've had this condition since childhood and I'm 60 years old. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It absolutely can be fixed. I've seen it happen hundreds and thousands of times, right? We just have to figure out how to, what your puzzle looks like, right? What your therapeutic puzzle looks like, put enough of those pieces together all at the same time, help you understand what healing looks like and what it feels like, and then just keep moving in that direction. So have hope. This thing gets better.